Hey everyone, Brandon with Flyin Miata back for another FM Live. And today we are going to talk about Happy Meals. Apologies that it's around lunchtime. I hope you've already eaten. It's not that kind of Happy Meal. We're talking about clutch Happy Meals, specifically for the NAs and NBs. Now, as always, you have questions, drop them in the comments. We got a handful of them from ahead of time. We will try to get to them live. If we don't get to them live, we will get to them after the fact. So, why are we talking about Happy Meals today, or what is a Happy Meal? So a Happy Meal is a term that we came up with decades ago, I think, very long time ago, for a clutch and a flywheel combo. So we like that combo because you get a better clutch with good behavior, but really the short version there is increased torque capacity for turbo cars, for higher power cars, combined with a lightweight flywheel. Excuse me, the lightweight flywheel is going to give you, basically the really short version is it makes it feel more like a sports car. It's more revvy. It's easier to rev match. You get better engine braking. Some people will say that you get better acceleration, which in a very specific situation with enough decimal points is probably accurate. Pragmatically, I wouldn't buy it to decrease your 0 to 60 time. But it does make it into more of a sports car. So we do really like the lightweight flywheels. Now our clutches, again, they've got really good torque capacity, 318 pound-feet at the crank for the level 1 and 353 at the crank for the level 2. But they do that while being very well-behaved and friendly. Smooth engagement. It's not a crazy heavy pedal. A lot of people don't notice that it's any different at all than the stock clutch. I've actually driven stock replacement clutches that have heavier pedals than this one does. So very friendly, very pleasant to drive. So why do you want it? Well, the first thing we have to do there is ask a question: which part are you talking about? If you're talking about the clutch, you want the clutch basically for increased torque capacity without any of the drawbacks that can come with other clutches that have that increased torque capacity. The lightweight flywheel, again, just makes it more of a sports car. Revvy, engine braking, all that stuff I just talked about. Let's see. And these are both great for track and street. The one small qualifier I'll put on that is that if your definition of track is a drag strip, the lightweight flywheel has less inertia in it, so that can actually hurt your ability to get off the line as well as possible. So you might not want it for that situation. We're kind of splitting hairs there, but so if you're drag racing your car, you're totally fine. If it's a drag race car, you probably want to stick with a stock heavier flywheel. Excuse me. And then, I mean, if you need the torque capacity, but you don't like a clutch that's smooth and friendly and easy to modulate, then you could get a puck clutch that's more of an on-off switch. Some people prefer that. I think the number is pretty small, but hey, whatever floats your boat. This is not an on-off switch. This is very smooth and progressive and easy. So the Happy Meal, our clutches have been around for forever. But you may have noticed the tagline here is new and improved. So what did we improve? So one of the things, well, the one thing basically that we saw with these clutches is that a very small percentage of our customers had issues with the disengagement. It was not possible to disengage the clutch, which meant that it's not possible to shift gears. You can't disengage the transmission from the engine, which is the whole point of a clutch. Statistically, percentage-wise, it was crazy low. It was something like 2%. We sell a lot of clutches. So unfortunately, that did mean it was more people, higher number. So we had a problem to figure out. So we had to dig in, see what was going on there. Unfortunately, in the midst of that, our supplier was sold, which is actually a really good thing. We're very happy with the new owners, but it definitely expanded the timeline of updating these parts. Anyway, so the assumption that what happened is with the old setup, you needed to adjust the clutch pedal quite a bit, the hydraulic system quite a bit, in order to get proper disengagement. And on nearly all cars, that was fine. It was no problem. It was just a thing that needed to be done. On, again, a very small percentage of cars, it was not possible to adjust it far enough to get it to disengage. So what we did is we kind of looked to see how we could fix that problem. And what we did is we adjusted the thickness of the disc. So this is an old disc, very easy to tell apart because it has 4 springs. This is a new disc, it has 6 springs, so pretty easy. So what probably won't show up on camera because it's really hard to see. So the way the disc works, you have friction material here, right? It's like brake pads. It's designed to slip and slide, but then once it's fully clamped between the plate and the flywheel, it has a high friction, so it's not going to slip, and it's going to hold that torque, and it's going to transfer everything that the engine is making into the rest of the transmission, and most of that is going to make it to the wheels. So there is what's called a Marcel. It's pretty hard to see, but basically in there, the easy way to look for it is that there are little gaps between the metal piece in the middle and the friction surface on one side or the other. So that is a little more generous over here than it is over here. So what that means is that you have the same amount of friction material, which translates to lifespan, all else being equal, of course. And, excuse me, but because the Marcel is thinner, the distance here is thinner. So that means that it's not quite as difficult. You don't have to adjust the clutch so far, and oftentimes not at all, to get that proper disengagement. So if we look at the range, kind of the easiest way to look at it, if this is the range of adjustment that you have available in a clutch, and this is a completely arbitrary thing. Don't try to attach it to reality. This is just a chart. And a stock clutch needs to be here. Our old style clutch was here, which was fine. It was still within the range, so no problem. But a small number of cars, between tolerance stack up and who knows what, kind of moved over into this area, and there was a problem. So by thinning that, we don't require as much of an adjustment, if at all, and we're not going to exceed the adjustment capacity of the system, if you will. The torque capacity is at least as high. These are, the new disc is not a lot, but a little bigger in diameter. So you've got probably more surface area there. I haven't actually looked at that part. Looks like slightly more surface area, but multiplied across the whole thing, it equates to more. So short version, this has been working really well for us. We did quite a bit of evaluation on the front end to make sure that it was good. And these have been shipping out with all clutch kits since November, I think, of last year. So if you've bought a clutch kit recently, you're good. You got the new one. If you bought a clutch kit a while ago and you have the old one, there's a 98% chance you're still just fine. So I wouldn't really worry about it. But if you have any problems, as always, reach out to our customer support team, and we have a good solution to take care of you. Okay, let me do a note review here. Okay, I think that satisfies my little spiel at the beginning, but we have some questions. What kind of questions do we have?
Since the adjustment window is so friendly, can I just ignore the adjustment part of the instructions?
No. So the question is, can I ignore the adjustment part of the instructions? Really, with the old setup, no, absolutely not. You have to follow the instructions. With the new setup, maybe. If your car shifts smoothly and it was not adjusted to an extreme before, then yeah, sweet, no problem. If you want to move the engagement point, you can do that via adjustment. If it's notchy and it's really hard to get it into gear, and that is a new development with no changes other than the clutch, that means that you need to adjust it. If you can't get it into gear at all, obviously, same thing. Now, this is all spelled out in the instructions, so I won't go real in depth in it. The short version is if you do adjust the clutch, if that is necessary for your preferences or your situation, it is very important that once you're done with the adjustment, you push the slave cylinder back in by hand. If you cannot do that, you will prematurely wear out the clutch because as the fluid heats up, it expands. Totally fine. That's the way it works. It's not a problem until you adjust it so far that now instead of expanding into the reservoir where it has no effect on anything, it expands into the slave cylinder, which partially disengages your clutch, which means that it's just barely slipping and you don't know about it until a few thousand miles later, your brand new clutch is cooked. So that makes it sound more dramatic than it actually is. It's super easy. Just follow the instructions. And if you do adjust it, you have to do that double check on the slave cylinder to make sure. Did that answer the question? Okay, perfect. Any more questions? Yes.
For our level 2 clutch, how heavy is the clutch?
So, good question. The question was for the level 2 clutch, how heavy is the pedal? It's kind of a subjective thing. I don't have an actual number for you. It is noticeable. It is clearly not stock. It's also not catastrophically heavy, if that makes sense. So be prepared for a heavier pedal, but it's for most people a manageable weight, if that makes sense. I will add, if you're not shooting to the moon and you don't have a crazy amount of power, just do the level 1. There are a lot of variables that are related in that factor into the torque capacity of a clutch. And the really short version is that our ratings are conservative. It's not a guarantee of anything. And there are so many, if your clutch is adjusted improperly, it's not going to hold any torque. So anyway, unless you really, really need a level 2, my 2 cents, I would go with a level 1. But the level 2 does work really well if you need that kind of crazy stuff. And same disc between the two of them. The plate is different. The plate is different between the level 1 and the level 2, specifically the springs and the number of metal pieces here, springs there. But the discs are identical between the two. So we didn't seem to have as much of a problem on the level 2 as far as the disengagement issue. My guess is that's strictly statistics speaking. Most people really don't need a level 2, so they go with a level 1. So, but same disc, same problem solving, no big deal. Yes.
Does this update have any bearing on the NC or ND platform?
You're skipping ahead. That's one of my questions right here. So no, I'll skip ahead. One of the question that Mike had from the live audience, thank you, that's also on my list here is, does this have any bearing on the NC or the ND? And the answer is kinda. So the ND, no, totally different, no relation whatsoever. The NC, we never had this problem, so it didn't need to be solved. Of course, there's no compromise in our solution either. The only kind of qualifier there is that the 5-speed NC does use the same disc, so it gets the updated disc, even though it didn't need it for the reason that we changed it, if that makes sense. The 6-speed has a different spline count, different input shaft on the transmission, so that has its own disc and is not related. Now, that said, I will roll back a minute. Because of the decreased Marcel here, when you are going through that initial break-in, this clutch is going to be a little more juddery. It's going to kind of slip release a little more than this one will. Now, that goes away with miles. It could take about 1,000 miles, but it will go away, and it is ultimately totally fine, but you may have that behavior on the very front end as that clutch is breaking in. Any more questions? Okay. Okay, so let's go through the questions that I have here. Again, if you have more, drop them in. We'll get to them afterwards. Okay, I have an older stage 1 clutch. It's not installed yet. What are the essential differences? Is it worth upgrading to this newer one? I think I went over that. The visual difference is to identify exactly what you have. 6-spring equals new, 4-spring equals old. This worked totally fine in 98% of situations, but for 2% of the population, it was an issue. I would have no problem installing this in my own car. If you have an issue, which is incredibly unlikely, but if you do, give us a call. We have a solution for it. There are a lot of exclamation marks in this next question, and frankly, I don't blame you. So, will you have replacement heavy-duty throwout bearings in stock soon? I have been waiting 2 years, 5 exclamation marks. I don't blame you, frankly. That is another, I'll spare you all the gory details, but the short version is that was a bit of a debacle when our supplier changed hands and some things went over with the transmission and some things had to be reinvented. This fell into the latter category. The short version is we are so close to there. We have level 2 clutches with a heavy-duty throwout bearings in stock, and we have a pile of the heavy-duty throwout bearings in the building. We just need to take care of the paperwork and to actually get them on the website. So I don't have a specific date for you, but it should be in the next few days. Sometime next week, we should have those available for purchase, ready to go. Yes.
Now that the friction disc material and Marshall is overall thinner,
Mm-hmm.
can you expect less lifespan out of them?
So can you expect a shorter lifespan from the thinner disc than the old thicker disc? So I did talk about this at the beginning. No worries if you missed it. I'll talk about it again. So the overall thickness, if we're measuring from here to here, is thinner between the new disc and the old disc. However, what that question is effectively asking is the thickness of the friction material specifically. So this dark, basically black section here. And there's 2 of them, one on either side. So that thickness has not changed. So no, there is no effective difference in the lifespan of this disc, friction material. I probably have, I'm going to guess, not quite 100,000 miles on my level 1 clutch. It's got to be at least 80. Bunch of track time, street time. I do not abuse it. I don't really do burnouts and donuts and such. And it's fine. It works great. So you can expect a very long lifetime out of that. Kind of expand on that a little bit. The torque capacity of a clutch is going to vary based on its thickness or throughout its life. The torque capacity is basically generally the minimum that you could expect. There are a lot of variables that are involved in that, so qualifier there. But the short version with this is that if you don't need this for power capacity, that's great, but you will have a greater torque capacity on this, on our disc than you will on a stock clutch once the friction material is thinner and your clamping force is decreased and your friction is decreased just a little bit. Now we're splitting hairs there, to be fair. You're probably going to wear it out before you make it slip just for power reasons. But if you're kind of on that cusp power-wise of needing an upgraded clutch, something like ours, versus a stock clutch, then our clutch will let you get a little bit more life out of it. Again, we're kind of splitting hairs there, but it's a little bit more, and really, there's a bit of a price difference outside of that. There's not really any disadvantage to our clutch versus a stock clutch. Yes?
Is there any advantage to using our friction disc with a stock pressure plate or other pressure plate?
So I'm going to combine that question with another question here. Can I mix and match clutch components? The short version is probably. The slightly longer version is I wouldn't recommend it. So you can probably mix and match components. There are some specifics that are involved there. You're going to have to pay attention to things and make sure, but it'll probably work. But you don't know how much of that clutch's torque capacity is coming from the clamping force on the plate versus the friction of the disc. So if you mix and match components, now you have a mystery torque capacity. So, and you can't, anyway, you have a mystery torque capacity. So if you have some random parts that somehow are new and not used, because that's a whole different can of worms. And you just need something to make your car move, sweet, it'll probably work, no problem. Make sure that this kind of the hub fits. I'm not going to put it together because I would ruin this friction surface by touching it to this surface that might have anti-rust oil on it. But if this fits within this, you're probably okay. Obviously, the thickness of the disc is a question as well, and then the torque capacity. So yes, if you're desperate, probably wouldn't recommend it. It's better off to go with a complete system that's meant to work together. Yeah, so that is a thing that I missed on my notes here. So these are all 1.8 parts, 94 to 05 parts. So if you have a 94 to 05, you can replace the flywheel and use it with your clutch, or or vice versa. You can use our clutch with a with a stock flywheel. Be sure that you resurface it when you do that so that there's a fresh surface for the disc to break in on, transfer some material and all that fun stuff. If you have a 1.6 Miata, this complete setup altogether will fit on your car, no problem, easy peasy, nothing complicated. However, the 1.6 does have, the 90 to 93 does have a unique flywheel and a unique clutch versus the 1.8 stuff. So you cannot put our clutch on a 1.6 flywheel, and you cannot use a 1.6 clutch with our flywheel. Basically, they're just incompatible. So use the whole setup, the Happy Meal, as one thing, and then you're good to go. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay, so what exactly are the benefits of upgrading to this clutch over the stock clutch, especially in a daily normal car? Your main advantage is more purple. So realistically, if you're making 100 horsepower, you don't need this clutch. The stock clutch or a quality stock clutch replacement, like we sell, will work just fine. The qualifier that I'll put on that is that if you think maybe, I'm really not sure, but maybe in the future I'll want a turbo, get this clutch, because that's one less thing that you have to worry about, particularly if you're paying somebody else to do the install for you, and you don't want to have to pay them, okay, you do it this year, and then 3 years later, your stock replacement clutch is still in great shape, but it's not strong enough for the power that you're making, so now you've got to do that job all over again. Just try to future-proof. And really, that's basically it. Now, the flywheel has behavior advantages. The clutch has torque handling advantages that you need with increased power, like our turbo kits, which we're doing another drop next week. So stay tuned. With no real disadvantages because the behavior is so friendly. So I already answered that question. Okay, here's a good one. Is it worth doing the clutch and the flywheel at the same time? What are the real world benefits of the flywheel for a street car? So I think I already talked about that. Rev matching, engine braking makes it feel more like a sports car. So I would do the clutch and the flywheel at the same time for two main reasons. One, that means that you don't have to take your stock flywheel in to get it machined so that you have that fresh surface for the brand new disc. And pulling a transmission is kind of a big job. And you probably only want to do it once. So I would do both of those things at the same time just so that you don't have to get in there and pull the transmission a second time. Outside of that, sure, you can do it separately, but for those reasons, yeah, I would absolutely do them at the same time. Okay, more questions? Yes?
I drift my car and I'm a bad driver. Is this the clutch for me?
I drift my car and I'm a bad driver. Is this the clutch for me? So the clutch can handle quite a bit of abuse. With drifting, you want an immediate and abrupt application of torque in order to break the tires loose. The smooth, progressive nature of this can be overcome by just sidestepping the pedal, but that's not really good for anything. So if that is your main focus, I would actually say that you are one of the few people who want an on-off switch for a clutch and you'd be better off with a puck clutch. And what I mean when I say that is a clutch that just has kind of big chunks of friction material, but there's one here, one here, one here, one here, and there's just a void in between. So that kind of thing is terrible for a street car and very on-off behavior and kind of a headache to drive. And because of its on-off behavior is probably a better option for a drift car like that, because it's just going to smack. The torque is going to go from 0 to everything you have or everything you're applying through the engine in a very short instant versus a brief ramp up with something well-behaved like this. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay, so that is it. Thank you for joining us for another FM Live. These are every Thursday, so be sure to tune in. Make sure you are a fan on Facebook and Instagram so that you get all the notifications for these videos, among other fun Miata things. Don't forget about our email newsletter as well. And as always, thank you for stopping by. We will see you next week.